right, like call the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, July 15th, 2024 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gaffino.
Here.
Trustee Christensen.
Here.
Trustee Curtis. Trustee Gately.
Here.
Trustee Lowry.
Here.
Trustee Salazar. Here.
All right, thank you. Audience comments? Trustee comments? Item 1 under discussion. Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 tonight is a special use request from Red's Garage. They are looking to have a sales component to their business. Red's Garage is located just to the east of Route 25 off of Butterfield Road. With that, our village planner, Dave Hansen, is going to walk you through the special use request. And this just went to the Plan Commission recently.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, tonight we have petition 24-10, which Steve mentioned is for 119 Butterfield Road, special use for motor vehicle dealership. This is a technical use. Red's Garage.
Dave, I'm sorry. Can you talk more directly into your microphone?
Can you hear that better?
Talking to the mic.
Okay, sorry about that. So Red's Garage is proposing a motor vehicle sales component to their existing motor vehicle repair and service at subject property, which is located in the I-1 Limited Industrial District. A motor vehicle dealership is classified as a special use in the I-1 Limited Industrial District. The petitioner is proposing to designate 9 spaces in front of their building dedicated for that. The Plan Commission wanted to keep it at 9, so that's why we came with that number here tonight. Reds is also proposing to pave the rear area of the lot for additional parking of vehicles waiting for repair. As you might drive by Red's Garage and everything like that, they have a pretty full parking lot right now, so paving the back, they've mentioned in their petition, will help them increase the circulation and driving around their parking lot more efficiently. The use, it meets use standards for both motor vehicle sales and motor vehicle sales and service. Also, they mentioned their hours of operation will remain the same despite adding the sales component. The other last thing for this item would be for parking. The petitioner, right now, they have approximately 34 parking spaces. They'll be increasing it 15 spaces to 49 spaces. So they'll have 49 total spaces. If you subtract the 9 sales, they'll have 40 parking spaces on site. The zoning ordinance between these two uses require 30 total parking spaces. So they've got about 10 parking spaces to spare currently. And then also the Plan Commission unanimously recommended approval of this petition with the conditions that were mentioned, the rear area be paved and also limited to 9 parking spaces as shown in the plan. Here you go. Sorry about that. This is the site plan they're proposing. Also included is a draft ordinance for this, and the applicant is here to answer any questions that you guys may have, or I am here as well along with staff. Yeah.
So to the east, that backs residential, correct?
Correct.
Be a fencing requirement or something to obscure the view?
I believe there's trees right now. There might be a fence. I can double check that. There's a fence. Okay.
Concern is with this now turning into a used car sales thing. I mean, the history of this place is unique in that they moved in, they weren't supposed to use it for that use. We granted the use, and now they want to use it for something else. I just, want to make sure that this isn't something that every 2 years they're coming back and saying, well, now we want to do this one, now we want to do that. I just don't see. I mean, to only have 9 cars for sale. I mean, what do you even consider that? I mean, is that a used car dealership? Is it just a sales component? My concern is that suddenly these parking spaces in the back are going to now become a used car dealership, and I don't think that's an appropriate spot for it.
Okay. I'll let them speak to that right now, and then I'll follow up with that as well. Okay, let's go ahead.
Derek, aka Red. This is my business partner, Dennis, and this is my dad, just so everyone else, Andy. So to answer your question directly, we aren't trying to turn into a used car dealership in big numbers, anything like that. We are just trying to become a full service facility. We have come across the opportunity where we can, buy vehicles and obviously we have the ability to repair them. So being able to do that in-house is something we feel that would be good for us here. Obviously, bring more money into the city and here. We're not looking to move. We love our home here. So that's kind of why I understand us coming back again a couple of years later. It's actually, as of August, would be 4 years here. So we're, we've built a home and we're looking to stay.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So your intent is to repair a vehicle and then sell it up to 9 vehicles?
Yeah, and again, with most of the stuff we're gonna be buying, they're gonna repair. So we're not gonna have that high volume turnover like most used car lots. Buy them running and driving and try to instantly turn them over. So it will be a fair.
That's not gonna be your main
No,
focus
absolutely
anyway.
not. Our
Yeah.
number one focus is our service customers, 100%.
Yeah. How many
This is-
cars?
yeah.
Go ahead.
This is just an addition to what you're doing now. So you're gonna stay a
And-
auto repair.
Right.
And this is something that somebody wants to like give you a car, say that needs repair and you'll repair it. And hopefully give people a decent break on the price. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
So
good.
my question is what is it going to look like from the street? So, you know that there used to be a used car dealership over by Culver's, right? They had the little flag things and
Yes.
used cars, whatever price. And, you know, is that how it's going to look
No.
from the street? I mean, are
no,
they going to be
we-
labeled? Is there going to be signage? You know, what is it going to look like?
Absolutely. So our lot will virtually remain the same visually. All of our vehicles are required by the state of Illinois for us to have tags in the window showing they are for sale. I'm trying to think what No, there's, they have to dictate, we have the car, it's for sale by a dealer, or if it's not for sale, we have to.
So there will be like a tag on the windshields that face the street.
It'll be actually they're usually typically in the rear windows. It's a piece of paper. It's buyer's guide. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So all of the vehicles we're selling have to have buyer's guides in them. So.
So your buyers are probably just driving by. Are these probably online or other ways? So it's not gonna be like the flags, like he's mentioned, like a used car lot. It's gonna be really just people seeing online, they'll come.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Steve, once the use is granted, it doesn't prevent them from perhaps doing it that way though. Isn't that correct?
So Dave and I were talking, this is a special use. The board, just like the plan commission, can recommend standards to add in addition. So if you have a concern, you can state something like this, you shall have no flags indicating used car sales, or you can actually put that as a condition.
Right,
Well,
so,
my
so the
concern-
thing I said about the place, I don't even remember, it's now gone, the used car place on Culver's, that's the kind of thing, I would rather not see it look like that. In principle, I don't have a problem with it, I just don't want it to look, sort of
Hecky.
a mess.
Yeah.
Well, sure, if you
Yeah.
want to use that word.
I
I do use
just
don't want
skills
that.
instead of me.
I just
Yeah,
don't
that's
want
my
this to
concern.
turn into now we have, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. And now all of a sudden we've got 45 spaces in the back, big lights and everything
as-
else.
What Steve is saying though is, as it is being granted as a special use, the board
We
also
can
has
limit that.
the right to,
Yeah, no, if you want
revoke the
9
special
spots,
use
9
privilege,
spots,
I
but
assume.
Yeah.
I'm just worried that, pushing the envelope and, suddenly we have 45 cars and big bright lights. And now it's a used car dealership that also repairs, and it's a fully functioning, used car dealership that also does repairs. And I just don't think that's a good shot. And we need to also remember this back to a residential area as well.
Well, there's also a fence back there and trees. And the way I feel it is the company is a auto repair shop. And then an auto repair business, you repair cars, and some cars, some of the owners maybe wanted to sell their cars. If the cars are sold at a discount to some of our citizens that really need a vehicle, I think it might be a benefit to the village. So I'm all in favor of what they're doing over
I
there.
mean, you can sell cars anyway. It's just a limit, right? For the
Correct.
state. So the village isn't probably receiving sales tax. I mean, really from this way looking at it, we're gonna
I'm
receive
not-
sales.
Yeah, I
sales
mean, I'm
tax.
not against it. The only thing that my concern is what is it going to look like from the street? That's really
Yeah,
all
no,
my concern is.
100%. Right.
On principle, I don't have a problem with it.
We could put the,
I think the first thing to look at is the plan commission recommendation on the site plan. The cars for sales are limited to those 9 spots. I believe that by condition, they're limited to those right in front of the building already.
Correct, yeah. The condition for the plan commission are those 9 areas right there. It says cars for sale. That's the only area where they can show cars.
so you wouldn't
for-
even see them from the road probably.
You'd only see the cars that are in the lot right now that are there to get serviced.
And as Red has
Yeah,
mentioned,
okay.
as Red has mentioned as well, they're gonna have no indoor displays. It's all just gonna be these 9 spaces. We can, as Steve mentioned, for the conditions and everything, if you want to reduce that amount of spot or say you can't put anything in the rear, right now it's just only in that spot. So if you have some other way you'd want to do it, we can condition it that way.
Are there going to be less cars, Eric? Are you going to have like less cars in the front than you have now that are all set for repair? So it'll actually improve the appearance in the front, huh?
100%. Yeah, obviously paving the back lot, that's a lot of square footage.
Right.
Opening up a lot more parking spots. Anything waiting on parts and stuff like that now will definitely be waiting in the back lot. So allow day-to-day customers will have significantly more comfortability, coming in and out.
My thought is here we had a building that was vacant. They were making sheds. Now we have a business that's actually doing well there and wants to add, component to their main business. And, I think we got to support it. I think I agree with, Trustee Salazar about the, limit, maybe how it looks. But I mean, I just think that it's something that
Yeah, of
if-
course.
in this
Yes.
day and age, if you got a successful business and like I said, it struggled there for the last 20 years, different things would come and go. And, he's willing to asphalt the back lot and probably do anything we ask. So, I definitely support it.
I mean,
Seems
We're
like
good.
it brings value to the residents.
And a service. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, right. 100%.
We're happy you're here.
Yeah. Anything else? Red?
I just want to say the aura of the used car thing I know is very tough to break through, just like in service and sales.
Yeah.
What you're describing about what was Callahan's before they moved out, cars up on ramps and all the banners and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's I would say probably 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Me and Dennis pride ourselves on having a good, clean environment, and get away from that because people are like, oh, I have to go buy a car or I have to go get my car serviced. So we're
Yeah.
trying to break through that and have a good, clean environment. I just want you to know that we want it that way too. So.
Okay, I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. Sounds good. Steve, you need anything?
No,
We're good.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Move on to item 2. Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 2 is also a special use request. It's for Coops Driving School, which is looking to locate a commercial educational facility for youth driving. The use would be over at the plaza that is right off the corner, what would be the northeast corner of Randall Road and Oak Street. Why this needs a special use is basically anytime an educational facility goes into like a commercial area, it triggers a special use requirement. Driving schools really don't like when we think in the code for educational facilities, we're thinking schools or training centers that like the one that we have for West Aurora on the west side of town. So driving school, Nathan categorized this as being educational because it is a training place, almost like a tutoring center. So with that, Dave's going to walk through the special use request.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So yeah, for this petition is 24-11. It's 937 Oak Street. It's a special use for educational facility commercial. As Steve mentioned, Coops Driving School is proposing a commercial education facility for youth driving at the subject property. Coops Driving School will utilize one of the middle units in the strip center, which is approximately 1,100 square feet. This is actually the old cakery site. So this is where they'd be going over there. The proposed floor plan shows an open floor space, storage closet, and a restroom. The petitioner anticipates 4 behind the wheel vehicles be parked in the lot, and a maximum of 4 instructors will be on site at any given time. In regards to parking, facility will include a maximum of 35 students in a single class. The zoning ordinance requires a total of 18 parking spaces. The subject property currently provides 215 for that whole center. And the Plan Commission unanimously recommended approval of this petition. There was no conditions added to that by the Plan Commission. Also included is a draft ordinance. Also, the applicant is here to answer any questions. Eric, I don't know if you wanted to say anything or if the board has any questions, he's here to answer anything for you guys.
I'm good. Fine.
Yeah, another good service to the.
I'm fine
community.
with it.
Yep. Sounds good. Thank you. Right. Item 3, Steve.
Item number 3 is a discussion about having a full-time school resource officer at Jewel Middle School. Right now, we have an officer who's there 16 hours a week. We instituted that program a few years back. Joe Gorski, our deputy chief here, will go into it in more detail, but we're at a point now where we've been working with School District 129 to try to have a full-time officer there. As part of this agreement that is actually sitting with Kevin right now, we're looking to have it in a way where we can actually have that officer stationed out of Jewel the whole week, but occasionally if needed at West Aurora High School or at Herget, which is where, you know, the other middle school that our North Aurora students would go. If they need assistance there, our officer can actually go to those schools and assist as well. So with that, Deputy Chief Gorski is going to walk us through having a full-time officer there.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, trustees. Currently, we do maintain an agreement with District 129, the West Aurora School District, to provide an SRO on a part-time basis. That officer is Officer Sean McCoy. He's a veteran officer with our department, and he's been up there for approximately the last couple of years. His primary responsibilities and assignments are to Jewel Middle School. However, on occasion and at the request of District 129, he will also go and help out if there's any needs in any of our our 3 elementary schools. In addition to Jewel Middle School, we have several students in our jurisdiction here that attend Herget Middle School. And then when they leave Herget Middle School and they leave Jewel Middle School, they go into West Aurora High School. West Aurora High School does maintain a full-time SRO, but it is an Aurora police officer, and there might be a little bit of unfamiliarity with that officer, whereas the officers are familiar with Officer McCoy and the officers that have been there before him. So having the ability to have one of our SROs participate over at Herget Middle School will reach out more of our kids in the community in addition to West Aurora. And one of the things we've noticed with our SROs is they're a gap. They bridge a gap between our kids and the police community. So with that familiarity, they're a little bit more comfortable going to Officer McCoy or whoever the SRO is at the time and bringing any problems to them. That's a valuable asset to us in the police department because we can gather more information and with that, hopefully prevent any issues that may come up ahead of time. Like Administrator Bosco said, we have been in discussions with District 129 staff since the end of last school year to move this to a full-time position. It would benefit both us and District 129, and they've pretty much agreed that they would to our terms thus far. I think overall, the agreement, like I said, will build more flexibility in our SRO position. It's going to create a stronger bond and cooperation with District 129, Aurora PD, and it's going to increase that familiarity with our students as they transition from middle school into high school over in Aurora. And with that, I'm willing to entertain any questions that the board might have.
I think, you know, one thing I want to cover real quick is the financial aspect of this. So it's an 84, our officers are on 12-hour shifts. So it's an 84-hour time period for 2 weeks. So standard employees work 80 hours, officers work 84 every 2 weeks. So during the 9 months of the school year, the agreement that we have drafted right now is standard based on what we already have, which is the typical 50% pay. So the school district would offer 50% of the officer's base salary, medical insurance, clothing allowance during that 9 months of the school. The village would pay the rest of it. And then when they're not in school, we would have the benefit of that officer being on the streets doing regular patrol. Any overtime or anything requested by the school is paid for by the school. So someone asked me, actually the mayor and I were talking about this, and he asked a good basic question. So if the schools are paying for half of it, but our officer is always at the school, what is the benefit to having that 50% of us paying for it when that officer is only at the school? Now, obviously, the benefit is the fact that we have what Joe said, the relationships we build, but it really comes down to the board and it's a policy decision. If you believe you want a full-time officer in the schools, that's the cost. So it comes down to just that simple.
I have a question. So I'm not opposed to it, but are we getting any benefit out of it? Is there anything like, do you offer instruction to students on what to do if you get pulled over or, things like that? I mean, I think there's a real need with younger kids to, to be trained in the proper way to respect authority and respect police and understand, if you get pulled over, do this or that, or don't mouth off. Is there some instructional benefit to it? Because I agree with what Steve is saying. It's 50% that we're paying, but 100% of the benefit or 90% of the benefit is going to the school district, and keeping in mind that a lot of these kids that go to these schools don't even live within North Aurora. So, Aurora, Batavia are also getting a benefit that we're now paying for. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, and also, is there going to be a detriment to our neighborhoods by having, one, and now you're saying they'll probably want a second one next year. So now that's going to double our expense. Well, I'm just trying to make sure that there's some benefit to this.
Jump in? So there isn't, we're not doubling. So it's one officer they're already there part-time. It's taking that one officer, making them full-time. what Joe DeLeo is saying, Chief DeLeo, is once that officer becomes full-time, you've essentially taken him off the street for 9 months. Joe would ask for a 33rd officer. We only have 32 officers right now.
Is there a need for this officer to be full-time? I mean, what additional benefit would we
I think
get from that?
the staff believes there is a benefit to it. And in my previous community, I believe they had a full-time officer in both the middle school and the high school. The issue is, and I'm not trying to alarm anybody in any way, but I think there's more things that go on in the middle schools that the police officer currently intervenes on and works with those students that maybe people don't know. And so, Joe, would you like to talk about how your team works with them?
Sure. To answer your question, Trustee Curtis, Sean's responsibilities up at Jewel Middle School already incorporate that with our younger students in the middle school. He does do instructional as far as ALIS training and additional, and ALIS training, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of our run, hide, fight program. So how to react in an active incident or active shooter incident. That's a benefit that we don't currently have from one of our officers teaching our kids from North Aurora over at the high school. That's relied on the Aurora SRO. Our officer being taken over there. And just so you know, we wouldn't just send our officer over there on a daily basis. It would be requested by District 129, and it's at the approval of the chief or his designee. So primarily what we're doing is we're increasing our officers' hours over at Jewel Middle School because it is needed. We do have more issues arising at the junior high level than we're seeing at the high school level, but then also assisting with that transition later on. So to your point, we could incorporate that with District 129. They are very receptive to any ideas or programs we might be able to introduce that could help our students overall and ensure that they understand those life lessons that could help them down the road. I would almost guarantee that if we brought that type of proposal to 129, they would be receptive to it. So yes, our officers do act in an instructional level as well when it comes to instructing people on law enforcement type situations.
I don't understand the transition thing from the middle school to the high school. Can you explain that?
So when our students in North Aurora graduate from middle school, we don't have a high school in North Aurora. They go to District 129 West Aurora. So they're in the Aurora system over there, and that's an Aurora SRO. There's unfamiliarity with that officer because they might not have a daily encounter with them, where right now in the middle school, they're seeing our SRO every day. They're having interactions with them. He goes into their lunch periods. He goes into the classrooms.
But I'm asking, how is it once they get into high school, they'll be able to relate back to this officer that's at the middle school?
As far as how will they know him?
Well, you're saying the transition is such that once the kids get to the West Aurora High School, they have to deal with an Aurora SRO instead of the one that they knew in middle school. Is there going to be some kind of a connection between that officer's assignment at the middle school and at the West Aurora High
Yes,
School?
I see what you're saying, Trustee Lowry. But basically with this new proposal, moving him to full-time, there are opportunities for him to go work out of West Aurora to be at their events so that he can see those students as they transition over to high school as well. So it gives them the ability to see him on a basis over there as well.
Like during events and certain.
That's correct.
I see.
Yes, sir.
When
Did you say
review-
Aurora
Sorry, go ahead.
doesn't have, or they're not, are they doing a full timer as well, like at Herget or Jefferson or
That
the
I'm
other
aware of.
schools or,
Not that I'm aware of.
no?
Anytime we have a police president or school, especially that particular school, because I live right next to the school, I think it's a good idea. And if they're saying that they need police at that particular school, I'll take his word for it. I'm all in favor of the.
Well, plus the school
they're doing
district's
there.
asking as well, right? So I mean, when it
Yeah,
comes
they're
from
seeing the
them,
benefit.
you know,
Correct.
there
That's
is
why
a
they're
need.
willing to pay.
Yep.
And we gotta,
Yep.
yes.
I'm 100% for it because I think that gives an opportunity. I think it's just one more person as a resource. Like it's a resource officer that these kids come to know. They develop a relationship with them, and like you say, there's continuity when they graduate those schools and they have a familiar face. And I don't know a lot about it. My kids are already out of school, but I know that there's a lot of things that probably parents who don't have kids in school right now that are going on that would probably be very shocking to most of us. And so I think to have that presence there is, I don't know. I think it's
Yeah.
very valuable. So
I'm sure it's
I'm in
hard to
favor of it.
quantify the value too, but you know what, it does, you know.
I can tell
All
you with
different
the
ways.
student at Jewel currently, there are typically fights almost every single day.
Well, then that's the answer to the question.
There you go.
And I think the thing I want to clarify too is if there was, I won't call it a red flag by any means, but when we had the agreement sent to us and we were looking at the options of full-time, The first thing the staff question was taking that officer occasionally out of North Aurora and putting them in Aurora, knowing that Aurora has officers in those schools. But then after talking to Chief DeLeo and Deputy Chief Gorski, I do see the benefit of that. I mean, we do have North Aurora kids at those schools, and there are going to be times, I mean, West Aurora, last I heard, there are over 3,500 kids, I think, at that school. There might be a situation where maybe Aurora needs help, or it's a joint program that the city of Aurora wants to do with us, since 90% of those students are going to be Aurora, North Aurora kids. So I can see that. But what I want to make clear is it's been restated to me several times that it's not the intent that they'll be at Herget or West Aurora on a regular basis. They will be based out of Jewel Middle School. And occasionally, if needed, or if there's a joint program, they might be requested.
It's just an as needed basis.
Correct. It's not
Yeah.
supposed to be like every Tuesday or Wednesday, like, 2 days a week or anything. It's 5 days a week at Jewel unless requested.
How do we look at this from like an equitable standpoint? Because now we have one of our middle schools that has the full-time officer and Herget doesn't. So I mean, I'd like to know, I'd like to see this officer shared more equally between the two schools, because it's one school's getting the benefit of it and the other school's not, but both kids are all going to be going to West anyway.
Was there a part-time officer at Herget, Aurora?
So the way that Aurora runs their officers, their SROs are full-time. They are assigned to a juvenile detective SRO type group, and they do split time because they have more middle schools than we do. What we would be doing is helping supplement Herget as well, as like Administrator Bosco said, as an on-needed basis when it's requested.
Yeah.
They do have one, but he's up there on a part-time basis. He's not there full-time, so he might split time between Herget and one of their other middle schools.
For Aurora officer.
They're all Aurora officers. Our North Aurora officer has been solely at Jewel up until this point. And we do get calls throughout the year. We've had them in the last couple of years from District 129. If there's something that happens that gets reported through their Raptor system where it involves one of our North Aurora students, regardless of whether they attend Jewel or whether they attend West or whether they attend Herget, our officer gets notified, and we do deal with that internally as well here.
We're good.
Right?
Okay, so the next thing would be to bring an agreement back to the board for review.
Okay. Very good. All right, thank you. Number 4, Steve.
Okay, item number 4 is basically a workshop. So I had to pull up my screen real quick here. As you know, we have in the strategic plan and the comprehensive plan, we have all these plans that point to having, and I quote, another plan, which is the economic development strategy. So let me pull this up real quick. Okay. So in our current strategic plan, there is a goal to discuss an economic development strategy. And as the board knows, in my tenure here, economic development's always talked. We talk about businesses, how to bring them in, how to retain them. So what we're looking to do is create a formal policy, if you will, broken up of several different aspects of economic development, not just recruiting businesses. And our comprehensive plan was just updated, and it also calls for, having a unified strategy. Because if you remember, the comprehensive plan breaks the town up into areas, and it's talking about this area could have mixed use development, and this could be commercial. And so they figure one unified plan is a good approach. When we had our strategic planning workshop this spring, we actually did an economic development workshop there purposely to try to see if we can come up with direction from the board to create said policy. And what Mike and I did was, with the help of Jason, is we tried to put that, encapsulate that into one big strategy that we've been working on for a few months now, because we keep changing it, because every time we do it, we want to make it better. Every time we see something, we're like, nope, that's not right. We want it different. And we're getting there. And then we realized, Mike came to me and said, Steve, I got a problem. There's all these sections in the strategy, but most of them are based on incentives and attracting businesses and retaining businesses. So his idea was, why don't we, before we bring the full draft to the board, make sure that the policy at the front end is what the board wants. And that will help us make sure that everything we're doing to retain and attract businesses in the actual back end of the strategies are aligned with what the board is actually looking for us to do. So with that, here, these are just the categories. You have your incentives, you have your attraction and retention programs that we're looking to create, and you have ongoing economic development activities. Like property acquisition is just, here's general area that we'd be interested in to acquiring properties as available. Here's some business promotions we want to do. We've already started doing some of these in-house. Natalie handles our Facebook page. She's putting out more business-friendly posting. I don't know if you've noticed, but over the last few months, we put out probably about 10 or so that say things like, hey, what's your favorite donut? Here's, give us your favorite donut restaurant in town. And what it's doing is things like that on National Donut Day are just giving the ability to highlight North Aurora donut restaurants. And we're also looking at anytime there's a business opening or the mayor goes to a ribbon cutting, we're trying to get those pictures out there and, hey, this is a new business that just opened. So we're already starting to do a lot more of that on social media. So since we talked about the timing of this is actually kind of funny because we obviously just looked at the riverfront incentive. This strategy was in the works well before we actually started talking about that. So some of the questions are germane tonight. So one of the things I highlighted right off the bat was we've never had an adopted policy. So why is that? So looking back, the staff looked at it several times. And I think where we've had is I think there's two concerns that always come up with having a policy per se. One negative to having a policy might be, well, if it's too restrictive, you're going to tell businesses they can't come here. The staff's going to look at it and say, the board doesn't want them. Don't even come talk to us and then just move on. So maybe the board feels like you're going to miss out on a business that the staff vetted and didn't think it was the right thing for the village. Well, the truth is, the village board is the elected leaders. It's always been our plan. That's why we've always brought all incentive requests to the board. And what we try to do as showcased tonight was we take it, we still make sure it meets all the standards of state law. We still make sure it meets all TIF standards. Jason and Mike and I, we meet and we say, okay, Riverfront's asking for this amount of money. Does it look, before it gets to you or the board, does it look good on paper as far as the numbers? Okay, we need more data from them. Now we need to create a parameter and then we'll give the board the parameter. The board can always change it if you don't like it, or you can vote no or yes. But we're always doing that behind the scenes anyway. So the staff having that input, there's a lot of that. The only thing we're not having is telling people at the door whether they can come in or not. So right now we're taking everybody in, we're vetting it all out internally, and then bringing it to the board for a decision. And that's kind of how it's been for a long time. So the other thing that, the things that policy would do in a positive way is it gives the staff the ability to weed out incentives that we absolutely know the board doesn't want. So if the board says we don't want a junkyard in our town, literally a junkyard, I can look at the use and say, nope, you want an incentive for a junkyard? Nope, board said they don't like those. Okay, well then we're done. We don't have to spend staff time researching it. Don't have to create an incentive package, bring it to a board for a discussion. It's done right at there at the staff level, but it's still being guided by the board. And it also gives us the ability to know how to attract businesses and retain businesses proactively and not reactively. So that's the second benefit of having a policy. If Mike is in a new role and we now have a full-time economic development person, Mike's making phone calls all the time to property owners, business owners, talking to them, getting to know what they're doing. He can go and call, and I'm going to use this example because we use it in the office all the time, Olive Garden. He can call Olive Garden and say, the board wants restaurants. This is an approved use that they're willing to give you an incentive, because we've already heard Olive Garden said, no, they do not want to be here. We've tried. But now we can call them back and say, whoa, but we're willing to offer you an incentive. At least Mike has a tool now and doesn't have to come back to the board every single time to ask, hey, can I offer an incentive to this business? We have a proactive list of types of businesses we can now go after and vet them out, bring them to the board for review. And if you don't want it, you still vote no. You have the ability to vote yes too. So that gives us more ability to do that. And if we want to, let's say, retain a business, So we have car dealerships in town. Sometimes other towns want car dealerships. So sometimes you'll hear in the news, hey, neighboring town offers incentive to, Volkswagen dealership to, try to get them to move towns. Gives us the ability to look at that and say, okay, is this a real threat? Can we go to our existing dealership and retain them by offering them an incentive to stay? And once again, these are things that still go to the board for final approval, but it gives Mike the tools to actually make those upfront calls. So how do you do that? How do you determine what the board, with all respect to the board, and in my position, the board always makes the final decision. That's what I've been raised to do for the last 20 years since grad school, is the board makes the decisions, I just implement them. So with that case, how do I get the board's guidance like a strategic plan for economic development? Well, that's what we think we're getting to. So tonight I'm going to ask you direct policy questions on incentives. And we're going to see if we're getting close to what the board wants.
Is this the established policy based on the question's going to be to establish a basic quality? Is that okay?
Correct. And Trustee Lowry, the funny thing is, even though they're not necessarily related, I refer to this, I'm going to give kudos to Jason and Bill Hanna before him. We use our purchasing policy internally all the time, just like our HR manual. We bring it to the board for updates every couple of years when we think something needs to change. That's what this is. It's a policy set by the board, voted on by the board, giving the staff direction, and then we follow that policy. And if there's ever a need for a change from our perspective or your perspective, we bring it back to the board for discussion. So here's just a list of what would be in this section on incentives. These are types of incentives. They're not necessarily all of them, but these are the ones that we historically use. These are the most common ones. I'm not going to read them all, but basically the big ones are property. Well, property tax for us isn't a big one, but it is for, but we actually did work with a hotel to come in town and worked with our school district, and the school district gave them a property tax rebate in order to help get them to come here. Tax increment financing is one of our biggest ones, our TIP districts, the ability to use increment from the EAV when it goes up. And sales tax is our most common one. I mean, that's the one. We did it tonight with the car sales. You do it with grocery stores like Woodman's. It's the easiest one because you're getting revenue in and you're sharing revenue out. So you're only expending money that you're taking in. Usually they're percentage shares. So this is just a fundamental process. I put it in here just to show you in the plan what it would look like. Basically, the steps are just are they are now. So someone comes to the village. Usually it starts with Nathan. A business will call community development first because they're always asking if the use is allowed. That's always the first question. Can I build a bounce house, park, internal bounce house park? Well, Nathan has to look, where do you want to put your business at? Now, Mike, if he gets that call, we're blessed to have Mike have 10 years of knowledge as our zoning officer. So Nathan usually gets the call and says, yep, that zoning use is good, or it's a special use. Here's Mike Toth. You might want to talk to him. He can talk to you about becoming a business in town. If it's a permitted use, Nathan's like, I don't even have to deal with you. If it's a special use, Nathan and Mike work together to bring it forward. Staff conducts internal review. So that's where we make sure everything qualifies and meets all of our guidelines. We follow up like with Riverfront. When we have questions, we say, can I have more information? And then after we vetted it all out, it goes to village board for final approval. So we're just taking the current process and putting it in the policy as the formal process. So this is a big one, and big in scope, but small on screen. So basically this chart is something that we created to easily define what the board wants and what the board doesn't want. So I want to go through this real quick. And if you look at the easier one to start with is the qualified expenses. So when you're looking at things like these are things we already do. So you want new construction, that's a qualified incentive request. If you want existing space build out, so let's say you have an empty tenant space in a strip center, someone wants to build out a restaurant in there, they want to come in and ask us for money to, for equipment, they can do that. Site preparedness, property assemblage, buying properties, infrastructure like roads, those are all things that we do now. And we even added demolition because in the past we've used the TIF district to actually demolish properties to make them viable, developable space.
Steve, can you clarify on the acquisition? Are we giving grants or down payments or partial payments? What does that mean?
Property acquisition as an expense just means that if the developer had to come in and buy properties, we might be able to actually help them with some of the costs to buy properties to assemble for a larger development. So if it's a multi-parcel development. Unqualified expenses. So these are, basic things like business equipment, payroll, like we're not going to supplement your first 6 months of employee costs, office supplies, furniture, or signage. We actually do, the TIF district already does have a signed program, so you can take advantage of that if you're in a TIF. Now, if you see anything you don't like, tell me right now and we can talk about it. But qualified uses, I think most of these are going to be ones that the board already has told us in that workshop through strategic planning that you're interested in. General retail is basically stores. Automobile sales, obviously, are dealerships. Places for eating and drinking, we made it very open-ended so that it can be anywhere from a sports bar to a restaurant. So anywhere where you can get eating and drinking, because it's very hard, as we all know from the video gaming discussions, to define a restaurant depending on who you talk to. Entertainment venues, and those are not just like sporting venues, those are an axe throwing place or something like that, or a internal pickleball court. Those are venues. Lodging and resorts or hotels, mixed use development, specifically mixed use, because if you'll see in the unqualified area, we have residential. So we can get to that in a minute. Mixed use developments typically are commercial and residential together. And then, beautification projects, we threw in there, if someone wants to take an existing property and beautify it in one of our neighborhoods, put a pocket park in, something like that, the board might want some enhancement like that from a neighboring business. And then vacant commercial site enhancement. So we did that one. I didn't know how to word it. So that basically is, if someone wants to take a vacant piece of land, but they want to make it more readily available for development. So a good example would be the incentive that we gave through the TIF for the property just south of 88 about a year or so ago. And that was the buyback access from IDOT. And the idea being that it's not something we typically would incentivize, but the argument is made that without that access, the property isn't going to develop. It needs the access. And would a developer want to put $67,000 down for that access up front and then have to deal with IDOT for a full year to try to get that to get approved? So we put that in there just so it's there. But the unqualified uses are the ones I think that the board might have some questions about. So you have your liquor stores, tobacco, gas stations. Stop me if you think any of these should be qualified.
Well, I got to stop you on the gas stations. Just to answer my question here. So if a gas station came in, you would say, we really don't want a gas station?
What we're saying is we don't want to incentivize a gas station.
Oh, okay.
So a gas station would still be a special use by our zoning code. They can come in. The board is just saying in this policy.
Okay, I follow.
Okay. And then convenience stores, that one's we went back and forth on, because a convenience store is very specific, but typically convenience stores are where you're going to sell liquor and tobacco, which is why I think Mike wanted to label it as convenience store. Establishments hosting video gaming. So there's a second part to this, the actual policy that's coming up on the next slides. So the thought was, based on the years of conversation we've had with video gaming, the question to the board was, do you want to incentivize a business that wants video gaming? Or do you believe video gaming is the incentive by allowing them to have it?
I would think that just by allowing video gaming is an incentive for them, for the restaurant.
agree.
If it are,
I agree with that.
Yeah.
They get enough incentives already from the
Right.
state. I mean, they have a
Exactly.
monopoly on gaming.
Okay. Then the next one, residential without a mixed use component. We've actually had one approved, but it defaulted years ago.
Superior?
Yeah,
Superior,
right
yeah.
next to Village Hall. It defaulted probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And basically they had a 20-year agreement based on increment. It was in a TIF district. So the idea was that they would build townhomes 98%, if I remember the number, 98% of the increment that's generated from the EAV of those buildings was going to go back to pay for site development, because as you know, the Sperry property is, if you've ever looked at it, it is extremely steep and needed a lot of work to make
Plus
it
they had
buildable.
contamination and other stuff there. so,
Exactly.
And that's when the bottom fell out, was 2008.
Yeah.
I think that one, in my opinion, is like, I don't think we should incentivize that. That's my opinion.
And that's why we brought it up. It's a unique one because some towns don't incentivize residential and some do. So the question is, and I have a cop out at the very end here. I have a question for the board that kind of makes all this moot to some degree. It allows you to have the ultimate say no matter what. But just for this discussion right now,
Unless it's by 31, where maybe that would change things.
well, and that's the thing, it's residential. You're right. There's two ways to look at that. So the mixed use would be, let's say block one. Obviously, the concept that was in the comprehensive plan is both residential with a commercial component. If someone
that-
wanted to, build only apartments or condos or whatever on the other side of the street, you were saying that, you're saying, no, you'd have to have a commercial component to get an incentive. It can't just be straight residential.
I think that might work. My opinion.
So just keep it no residential, no straight residential with an incentive. Okay. Then the next one, and this is, the irony of this is we just incentivized warehouses, but now we're saying, given the fact that we're almost built out.
Steve, before we get
Yeah.
too far away from residential, as we were leaving the topic, I got this thought. I thought,
Mhm.
don't we do some kind of working like with the people that wanted to develop Moose Lake Estates, like finishing the infrastructure or the sidewalks and roads and that? Would that be considered an incentive? If we agreed to help develop the area with a builder?
So yes, if you're saying, okay, let me just make sure I have it right.
Do we do that?
No, not since I've been here, but are you saying I'm going to throw out the number, there was roughly 75 lots that were available. And are you saying, could we have gone to a developer and said, the village will supplement this by giving you, $2 million to build this area? Typically, you see those in TIF districts because then the increment comes back to the village. And it's funny you bring that up because on the policy side, there's going to be a question about front loading, is what we call it, where the village expends money up front and hopes to get reimbursed. Okay. We have traditionally, internally, we have told developers to come to the board without asking for that and see if they balk at it. And they always say, no, we'll go and share revenues. And that's what we do. Doesn't happen very often, but it would happen. Let's say in a mixed use development, sometimes the developer's really not that interested. So what they'll say is, you know what, I'll tell you what, village, you buy these 3 corner lots for, what is it, $2 million? You buy them for $2 million, but then you're going to basically upfront with our development, you're going to pay yourself back over time. The problem with that is, and I know Kevin's has worked with a community that went through this. When you buy property up front, there is risk that the development falls apart. And if the development falls apart, the village expended all that money and all of a sudden nothing happened and there's no increment coming back.
Yeah. We got you.
So with the warehousing and industrial, I put a little thing in there that says unless approved by village board. And I honestly think I'll do the same if the board wants with residential. And what that is we have an extra step that says, okay, if the board is worried that the village staff is going to say no to everything, what we could do is add something at the very end that says, if it does not meet the criteria of this policy, the business can petition the board directly, but approval by the board requires you to waive this policy so that you actually have to take a formal action by resolution to waive the policy to grant the incentive that didn't meet the policy. So what it does is basically gives you the opportunity to still hear from that business. They're like, no, you're just staff. We don't want to deal with you. We want to go right to the mayor and board. Okay, fine. We said they don't want residential, but you have every right to go to the board and petition. But then the board would have to review it and then you can still override the policy. You would just have to do it by vote. It's similar to doing like our purchasing policy where you would have to waive our purchasing for our process for certain things in order to, like if you found a deal that made more sense and our policy didn't cover it. So anyways, that's just something to think about. We'll come back to that. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, additions, subtractions for the uses?
No, I
I
think
just
it's
said, I think it's a good idea to add, unless approved by the village board with residential. I do think that's a pretty good idea, just in case we want to complete an area and we're invested in completing an area to develop. And so we want to encourage somebody to do that. That's what I was thinking, just long-term thought.
And I think it's a tool for the staff too, because there may be a rare circumstance that we didn't think about internally. And I use one maybe by block one where someone says, hey, I only have 2 parcels, 3 parcels, but I want to put something that matches what you got going on across the street. And we're like, oh, we don't incentivize residential. But then you look at that and you're like, it really does make sense there. It even gives us the ability to say, we have this process like a special use. You just have to go to the board directly. The staff will still give its view on it and explain how it came to be, and then the board can make that decision.
So Steve, the
Yeah.
way you had it, could you put the last slide back? So the warehousing industrial unless approved by the village, is that language unless approved by the village for all of those unqualified uses or just the warehousing industrial?
So what we were going to do is just warehousing and residential.
Okay, what you just described though was to make an exception for residential, right?
You're right. So right now
Okay.
it's just for warehousing and industrial. It wasn't on the slide, but I said we could do the same for residential without a mixed use component.
Okay.
But all the other ones, it would specifically not apply to, it would only apply to those 2, residential and warehousing / industrial.
Okay.
So basically a convenience store says, no, our policy doesn't allow it. Now, if the board ever wants to change the policy, you say, Steve, you know what? We should look at that incentive policy we had and talk about it.
Okay.
Might not
thanks.
allow anyone to petition the board.
Because then by doing that, we're back to where we are right here, which is no guidelines and just having people come in here unvetted.
I mean, all of those unqualified uses except for the last 2, I can't see us making any kind of exception for, but
If somebody wants to do a mixed use, I guess we could not approve it. That would include residential and say a convenience store.
Now, mixed use development is included as qualified.
Oh, but in residential and convenience stores, both not.
Correct, but in that case, you're incentivizing the use, not the store.
That we could- might
Right,
that
you're
be considered-
incentivizing the idea of a mixed
I see.
commercial / residential.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just talk through the property acquisition, because there
Sure.
is inherent risk that we help somebody acquire a parcel and then the development goes belly up, or they end up having to sell out, or the feasibility goes poof. And now we have no recourse to get, the money that we gave them for the acquisition. So I'm not quite sure if acquisition should be something we should be using this incentivization program on.
Sure, so I'm gonna fast forward to that right now. So if you look at the top one, all the yellow ones are policy questions. So the top one is the village will not accept requests made for front-loaded funding. All TIF incentives shall only occur on reimbursement basis from funds derived from the net increases of the increment. Meaning, okay, we're not going to give you $5 million upfront to build your mixed-use building or acquire properties. But once you do all that and you start building and your EAV comes in, we'll give you, whatever it is, 50%, 75% of that increment until it hits that $5 million mark that you're asking for. So that's backloading. And that's what we do now. That's what we historically have done. Mike and I have always been internally, but this isn't our decision, it's the board's. Internally, we've always frowned upon using front funding just because of the risk involved.
I agree with that. But as we spoke about at the last meeting when we discussed the Ram dealership, where we're not going to front load the funding, but the request should be made right at the beginning of the project, isn't that what we talked about? Instead of
So very
waiting-
first one
wait
here.
until they're almost all done to do it.
Economic incentive requests must be approved by village board prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Oh, I see.
Should a building permit not be required, the request must be approved prior to project commencement.
Okay.
So that would be, the reason we put the second part in there is if there's an existing business that's already built out, but they want an incentive for whatever reason, they would come back to us and say, hold on, before you move forward on this endeavor, I'll give you an example. The car dealerships that we have here sometimes we've had incentives where they've expanded their actual dealership that's already here. So in that case, they already have a building in the ground, but they're going to do additional work to it. So, whoa, don't put a new showroom in yet until you actually give us the incentive request. And we've had that with Ford, for instance. They did before they started work. They gave us the incentive request. We brought it to the board. The board looked at it and said, yep, we're good to go. Then it's all good.
Sorry, I
Yes,
should have just read
yes.
the second sentence.
That's okay. So this is the first slide. So if you want to go through this, that's the first question. How does the board feel about, we've done it twice since I've been here. One was for Mocha and one was for tonight with Riverfront Dodge, which is issued an incentive after buildings have started to be built or are built. So that's the first question.
What's the question?
Do you want to still give incentives after a project's already moving forward, or you want them to have to submit it prior to the project starting?
Like for expansion purposes? I think on both cases you cited, the village has been very well advantaged. You know, it was quite a good advantage for us to give those incentives and allow those to expand. So
I guess it
in
would
that
depend on the
regard, there's-
project, yeah.
yeah, it depend on what the project is, right?
Something on Route 31 where it's more blighted, that might be a little bit
I think
different.
it's all about education. Like, as long as the future business or current business knows the policy and knows that there is a policy, then no, we shouldn't be approving something after the fact. So it's really like making sure that the business knows if they're thinking about coming in or whatever else, like, here's our incentive policy.
Right, but we don't have one, so that's the problem. So
I know, but that's where you're headed with that.
I am.
That is,
because
that actually is the question.
I just let you guys know, in both cases, we've told both of those businesses well in advance to turn their stuff in. So it's hard working with businesses sometimes to get them to actually submit things. So that's the
That's
issue.
a good reason
I do
why it
think-
should be a hard and
So
fast
then you
no
want-
after the fact.
So you would like to see it be approved prior to the project commencement?
Well, the request to be made at least, right?
Yeah.
Well, cause yes,
I
that's
mean,
what,
that's why you have, that's why I said, then, okay, that's fine.
and the arguability to that would be is if they're already about to build it, or they have the funding in place, or they've already built their building and it just opened, then they clearly had the funding available to build it.
Right, right. If it's all done on like, hey, there's free money, I'll take.
Yeah,
$1 million of
I
that,
think we should leave
versus
it.
I need the money to do this. That's what I think.
It should always be approved prior to, because I think
Yeah.
that has to be on the business owner. There's got to be some risk assumed on their behalf. If they have a good feasibility plan, a good business plan, then that should already have been baked into it. They shouldn't have to be coming back to us, because that's not fair to the businesses who did their due diligence.
I think that's what we should do too.
And as the mayor has always said to me too, not every business asks for one too. And so not every business asks for one. So like, that's the hard part. When you have business asking after they're already open, and you have other businesses that are open that aren't asking for it.
Oh, I don't disagree.
Yeah, it doesn't seem fair that they can go all the way through it. They had the money to
Right,
build the
because the
business to
idea
begin
is
with, and
you-
now they're looking for the village to give a rebate on the tax,
Yes.
right, income.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we got the answer to number one. Number two, taxes or revenues historically received by the village will not be reduced below the base year incentive. What that is saying is, and it just happens that Riverfront was a good example again. We have now done multiple car dealership incentives where the staff has taken an existing business, even though the dealership technically is new. We've taken an existing business. We know they have Ram sales. We know Ford was already selling Ford vehicles. We know Honda, I think it was Honda was the other one, where we already know they have existing sales. So what we're saying is, as policy, if you have an existing business and we know the village, I'm making up a number here, it takes in $100,000 in sales tax revenue, and you're telling us your expansion is going to bring in $300,000 in sales tax revenue, then that means the village should maintain that we always get that first $100,000 that we were always getting before, and the incentive is on the development itself, the additional money that you
Yes.
said you're
Yes.
bringing
Yeah,
in.
that's it.
Okay, and that's what we've been doing. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that,
Definitely.
Yeah, and when you talk about submitting the paperwork prior to the project, are you also including expansion projects in that?
yeah, because that's why the second part of it's worded where it says, should a building permit not be required the request must be made prior to a project commencement. So if you're an existing business and you're not actually building anything, you don't need a building permit. And so the question is though, what is your project? And before you do said project, you should come in and ask for the money up front instead of, hey, I just put in this new whatever and I need you to pay for it now.
Right, right.
No, agree.
Now, you will see this again. It's not going to the board for approval yet. We want to make sure that we're on the right track. And then we're going to bring the whole strategy with all the sections back to review with the board. So this wording that's in here now will probably be tweaked a little bit, but it'll be based on what you're saying tonight.
Yes.
And then it goes back to the front loading. So what I heard is that we don't want to front load.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Now, the village board may consider warehousing, and this is what we talked about with residential as well. May consider warehousing and industrial requests after a formal presentation of an incentive and concept plan is provided. And I put in a note there, consider this also for residential without a mixed use component. So it sounds like the board saying, hey, we don't want to always say no to a warehouse or an industrial building or residential because there might be a unicorn, something in there like, okay, it's an Amazon fulfillment center or something big, that might have point of sale. Okay, well, now we have that. We said Amazon, hey, typically we don't do this. However, we actually have an out clause. You can make a formal presentation to the board and the staff will write up a report. And then the board still gets that ability to look at it. Okay.
That's fine.
And then we put in video gaming may be allowed once an incentive term is completed or incentive has been forfeited. So if you have video gaming, Mike wrote that one and it was real complicated and I like the way he wrote it. If you read it, it's saying if you don't have video gaming yet, you can't have an incentive and video game at the same time. But if you already have video gaming and you want to come in for $200,000 or whatever to expand your business, that's great. But you have to get rid of video gaming because you're already making, who knows, 100,000, 200,000 on video gaming. That is a privilege that the village has given you already. And now we're incentivizing you on top of that. So
Yes.
the idea is that you either have to forfeit it or not have it until you can get it later. So you can come in as a new business. Olive Garden comes in, they want video gaming, but they need an incentive up front. So you say, okay, $1 million, whatever it is, here it is. They build out the $1 million incentive term over, let's say 10 years is done. They could then go and get video gaming in the 11th year in that deal.
Okay.
It's just saying you can't have it at the same time.
Oh.
That's the way it's written. So that's why I want to make sure you understood that.
Yes, it's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I actually put this in right before. So this is a catch-all for everything. Any unqualified use or development seeking incentive where terms of the policy are not addressed, they can petition the village board and the village board can choose to grant the incentive, but must do so by a resolution waiving the requirements of this policy. So therefore, almost like waiving a bid is the way I envision the resolution, would be waiving the parameters of the policy.
Yeah. That's fine.
Okay, so it gives you an out. Okay.
Yep.
Now, that was it. But I'm gonna tell you, just as I said before, and I mean this sincerely, the staff here only wants to do what the board wants to do. And Trustee Christensen, you asked a good question earlier. Why not just have everyone come to the board? And the truth is we get a lot of random questions from businesses all the time. And I won't use a name, but I'll give an example. We had a business about a year ago that came and called Mike up and said, we want money. Town next door is going to give us money. And Mike goes, okay, what are you doing? Well, we're going to have a restaurant. Okay, great. So why don't you give me some information? Wait, you don't have a program for that? Well, hang on a second. Let's talk about this. What kind of, you got to submit some stuff. We got to look at it. Well, other towns just have programs for this. Okay. Well, that person, Mike's like, listen, if you wanted to submit something, we can vet it, bring it to the board. The person never got back to Mike at that point. Didn't hear from them for months. They ended up building in North Aurora without an incentive.
Where
just
they
'cause-
built?
They built in town.
Oh,
But just because they asked for an incentive and Mike said, we don't have a policy for that, they were going to build anyways. But they were just looking for money. And so we were able to be like, we don't have a policy for that. And they showed up anyways.
I think that I think the Dodge Ram dealership was a perfect example. If we don't have some kind of parameters and some kind of policy, then we have nothing to hang our hat on ever to deny someone the funds, really. And so that's why I think there has to be, right? You can waive the policy. I think that's a great, a fail safe. You can, if you really want to do it and there's some value in it and there's a situation we haven't all thought of. But I still think the village has to have something to hang their hat on and some parameters so that we don't appear as if we're playing favorites because we've given all of these before, even projects that have been done, and now we're giving them a tax incentive. So I'm for having these parameters in the way that you've outlined them. I think we need some.
Trustee Christensen, what you said about being a perk, I guess the issue was, it wasn't that we didn't have a policy that made them go away. They could have come back and asked, and we would have taken it to the board. And the question would have been is, would the board have denied a use that's on this list right now as a use that we'd be interested in for something that actually didn't need the incentive to begin with? And that's what we're trying to, hopefully the policy is weeding that out.
I think it's a good balance, but we do want businesses to come to North Aurora. So I mean, that's that line you run because, we have these storefronts here all the time. Why are we building new strip centers? We got all these empty storefronts and we want businesses to come. So I think we need to be careful. We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot either, like something comes
If
up.
it's Starbucks asking for money, no, you're not getting money. But if it's a small business who's looking to try to do something.
But if
Right,
it's
depends
Starbucks,
on-
And the location too.
Right, depends on the situation. Like I said, Route 31 might be
Route
something
31
different
is a little
versus
different.
Orchard Road or, right. So-
Randall or.
but if it's Starbucks by this policy,
Right, I think it's a
They-
good
they
start
could
because
ask
it
for
helps you guys and we all
it's
kind
a
of get
place
it.
to eat.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it gives you a baseline from which to make a decision.
Okay, I know we're getting up, so I'll say the last thing, where we didn't go any further because it actually, Mike and my brain started to hurt, was restaurant is the trickiest one. I used that as the example tonight. Is a restaurant, we put places for food eating, but I'm curious, just what in the board's mind is a restaurant? And the reason I ask that is sometimes businesses ask for us. Now, I'm gonna use Fortunato, brand new restaurant, couple thousand square feet, big, 100 tables, whatever. That's obviously a restaurant. We've had people ask, like that are carry out only, or that only have a few tables, or just a small storefront. So I guess that's the question. If you were looking for it, would you want it open-ended that anybody selling food can ask for it? Or is there a minimum you'd want to see in the size
Ask
of
for
the
an
restaurant?
incentive.
Yeah, if someone, because right now the way it's written, that was the last question Mike and I had. Anybody opening up a restaurant, anything that sells food qualifies.
I mean, here's some great hot dog stands that
100%. That's
millions of dollars.
right.
They don't have a table.
Correct.
So tables and
That's
chairs.
what it
is
comes
it-
down to the amount of money that they're gonna potentially bring in a year and them knowing how long is it gonna take for them to pay it back?
Okay.
And then it's the risk for us as the village, right?
So leave it open-ended, like leave it that way so that anybody with any type of restaurant can come in.
I
And then
would
the board,
say we haven't had that many. So historically, do we?
And then we can review it from there.
Yeah.
They're only gonna have $100,000 in sales in a year. They're probably not gonna get any incentive because
$100.
you'll come cut their ribbon.
That's right. $100.
That'll be the incentive.
Fair enough.
okay, then I'll keep working with Mike and Jason, and I think in a few weeks, we'll have maybe a whole draft. The rest of the plan is already in draft form, so to speak, just has to be put together. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, it's good. Let's see, no exec sessions, so motion adjourned.
So. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Good night. Batten down the hatches.